I'll open up for Q&A. Ryan, starting with your question, which I will now get you to repeat.
Sure. My question was at the, let's say the last day of the quarter, it's June, we're coming up to it pretty close. Like, should you be able to measure the KR and be able to make a decision whether or not it was completed? Because, the alternative is you could kind of structure the KR to where maybe you're letting like data bake in or give campaigns a little bit more time to run. And you basically give it a couple more.
Maybe I get your question. So let me try and answer two aspects to it in terms of my opinion and my perspective. KRs definitely should be measurable. You should ideally, except for binary KRs, which are also kind of measurable in binary form. And as I said, try and avoid them as much as possible. At some stage in an idealistic world, maybe we won't have them, but let's see. I haven't yet been able to fix that. But KRs must be measurable. They ideally should also be measurable ongoingly. Last time somebody asked a question that, I want to get 5 testimonials from a customer. And if that happens at the end of the quarter, then until then, do I just have 0% progress? And my perspective is that, if you've decided on a series of milestones of steps that you need to do to achieve that KR, you can keep marking progress. Obviously, after doing all of that stuff, if you still got 0 testimonials, you will have to eventually mark the KR as a 0% completed KR. But they should be measurable, and they should ideally be measurable on a continuous basis. And I think part of your question doesn't get answered through this, so I want to clarify this, right? There is no way that we can 100% determine, what will get completed in exactly 1 quarter. This is actually another dilemma of mine that I haven't been able to resolve per se. And certainly not across multiple teams. So it's not going to be a situation where the product team, engineering team, GTM team, all of them have KRs that would be exactly measurable on the last day of the quarter. Some of them might need an additional few weeks before that KR becomes, fully measurable because some data is, still pipelining in, etc. Some of them might have already finished measuring their KR and already finished achieving it. Which is why I'm not saying that the lines of our planning are drawn in sand. It's okay as long as we have a reasonable quarterly cadence for planning. It's okay as long as we have a reasonable, fortnightly to monthly cadence for our check-ins. It's okay if you have a reasonable sort of annual cadence for our company annual planning. And those boundaries can stretch a bit left or right because of things that still need to get done, and that's time. That's okay. That's the other thing I don't want to do is, well, there are two sort of elements I want to talk about here. One, I don't want to stretch the planning process forever to try and achieve perfection. But at the same time, I also don't want to do it too quickly because there's a deadline that says, hey, or everybody happens to be in Mumbai and we have our town hall on, 6th of July. So we have to complete the entire planning process by then. And then we actually compromise on the integrity of the planning process. So again, it's a important balance. We want to make sure that we don't end up with poor objectives, poor KRs. So the planning process is important. At the same time, we don't want to wait for infinity to make it perfect. So, those are the things that just wanted to add. Does that answer your question, Fo?
Yeah, it does. Thanks for that.
All right. Next question. Any other questions from?
Bhavin, do you see some questions are being posted in the Flock channel?
Oh, okay.
The OKR training by Bhavin.
All right. Okay, brilliant. So next question, Rahul Tibrewal, not all objectives will have the same impact. Should we assign weightage to each objective? And if yes, how do we assign those weightages? This is actually a very good question, Rahul, and this is actually a practice that is part of sort of OKRs. I personally don't want to do it this quarter and may not want to do it ongoingly. So I have two perspectives here. The more complex we make the process, the more context we have to carry in every check-in, every planning session, every discussion, etc. Right? So yes, mathematically, one could argue that if you have 4 objectives, should you assign weightages to each of them? That way, okay, achieving this objective only achieved, 25% or 20% of the entire team's objectives, while this one made a 50% impact, etc. Right now, my prescription, at least for this quarter and maybe ongoing quarters, is what I mentioned last time also. In your documents, try and order your objectives, and within those objectives, the KRs in descending order of priority. And that might be enough to start with as a good enough reflection that, okay, this is the order of priority for everybody. Will we assign weightages at some stage? We might. If we get even more mature to a point where everything else is muscle memory, then this is not a bad idea to potentially call out, what are the most important objectives, etc. The thing that's important is to not pick 50 or 10, but pick 3 or 5 objectives, and between 1, 2, 3, 4, good KRs that will sort of measure against those objectives, basically. Next question, how to plan or account for bugs or system outages under OKRs? So this is something that is, again, very good question, Amit. The notion of OKRs is not that it occupies 100% of your time. And so there's a term called BAU, which is business as usual. And then there's your OKR work. And if you take any given quarter for your team, the goal is that ideally 70 to 80% of your time should have been spent on OKRs, and 20 to 30% of your time will be spent on business as usual activities that will happen outside of the OKRs. So whether it's some emergency bug or system outage or so unknowns, or regular business as usual activities where you have to sort of attend certain meetings or give some updates or things of that, those don't move OKRs, but you still have to do them because it's business as usual activities. And so things like this end up getting accounted for in business as usual. The interesting rule about an OKR, or specifically a KR here, is that a KR is put into place to move a KPI from current value to target value. And once you've done that, and it's gonna remain there, that objective in KR no longer remains important. And then everything around that process becomes business as usual. And let me give you an example for that. Let's assume that the talent acquisition team sets an objective that says, talent acquisition team sets an objective that says, I want to improve the NPS score of every single candidate that comes to interview at my company, from the current score being 50 to 65, as an example. So if talent acquisition team picked that up as an objective this quarter, then they will have initiatives to try and move that from 50 to 65. So some of those initiatives might be, hey, I put into place a process to ensure that a candidate always gets feedback from us. I put into place a process to ensure that, when a candidate comes to our office, they feel welcome, they're, fed well, there's not much time gap between interviews, and they're not sitting and waiting for hours on end for the next interview, right? So all of these initiatives will be taken by them. Now, once they've put these processes into place, they don't need to repeat those same as initiatives. The notion of putting those processes into place has to not be repeated next quarter, because those processes are already in place. They already took that KPI, and let's assume that it actually moved from 50 to 65. Now, to keep it at 65 is business as usual. It's no longer an OKR, because I set an OKR to move something from 50 to 65. Once I got it to 65, as long as I put all the processes in place, keeping it at 65 in most cases becomes business as usual activity. So that's another example of business as usual activities in general. So that's sort of a long answer to your question of bugs, system outages, and business as usual activities. There'll be a list of them. Hopefully they occupy the smaller minority of your time, and the majority of your time is spent in moving the needle on stuff that's important from an OKR standpoint. Okay, next question from Ryan again. Should we be including an omissions list in our OKR planning process to prevent OKR creep by folks like Sam? So there's visibility around why we've decided very intentionally to not do these items, or is this overcomplicating the process? Ryan, I don't know. I think the real answer to this question is that Sam should learn, and not that we should complicate the process. So to me, the idea should be that all of us should become good at not constantly getting distracted by opportunities that don't move the needle and feature creep and whatever not.
I'm picking on Sam, but we could replace that with somebody's name who starts with a B and ends with Avin. So
exactly. So I was going to, by the way, before you said that, I was going to actually say the exact same thing. The same applies to me, by the way. Whatever process you put into place, it won't prevent us from shouting out distractions, and we make it so easy to do that on a constant basis because of Flock Messenger itself. I see them all the time in various channels, and to the extent that I'm starting to sort of understand this whole notion of how instant messaging can be disadvantageous also in many respects, right? And depending on who it comes from, there's a certain quota of automatic trust allocated to it, and we end up having this sort of feature creep or OKR creep, basically. But yeah, so I think the reason for some of these presentations, the reason for the check-ins, the reason for the retrospectives and what I'm doing out here is so that you don't fall victim to me or to Sam or to Ryan or to Ninad, and that we actually, all of us can individually think and question and ask for justifications and validations, where required.